There are moments in life that split your entire existence into two halves. Before and after. This is one of those moments. It was 4 a.m. The kind of silence that only exists in the deepest part of the night, when the whole world is asleep and nothing moves. The kind of silence that makes every small sound feel enormous. I was asleep. I had no idea that in the next 60 seconds, my entire life was about to be torn apart. And then I heard the door. Music builds slightly. Stay with me. Because what happened next, what I did, what I discovered, and what I became, is something I never planned. Never imagined. And never, not even for a single second, saw coming. This is my story. My name is Sarah. And before I tell you what happened at 4 a.m. on that cold Tuesday in November, I need you to understand something about me. I am not a dramatic person. I never was. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a mother who believed that you keep your head down, you work hard, you love your family, and you trust the people who sleep beside you at night. She taught me that a good marriage is built on patience. On grace. On choosing your person every single day, even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. I believed that with my whole heart. For 11 years, I believed that. 11 years of marriage to a man named Daniel. A man I met when I was 24 years old, standing in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, wearing a coat that was way too thin for the January cold, trying to figure out how to work the new espresso machine because I had just started my job at a small marketing firm that week. He walked in. He smiled. And something in me just settled. Like a snow globe after all the snow has finally drifted down. That's how I described it to my mother on the phone that night. "Mom," I said, "I think I just met someone." She laughed. She said, "Sarah, you say that every time. But this time was different." I knew it. I felt it in the way you sometimes feel things before you can explain them. Daniel was charming. Daniel was funny. Daniel had this way of making every single person in a room feel like they were the most important person there. He was a financial consultant. Smart, well-dressed, ambitious. He came from a good family. His parents were kind. His friends liked him. Everyone liked him. And he liked me. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged on a beach in Portugal at sunset. We got married in a little white church in my hometown with 200 people crying happy tears in the pews. I was 30 years old on my wedding day. And I thought, I genuinely, completely, with everything I had thought, that I was the luckiest woman alive. We built a life together. We bought a house in the suburbs. A beautiful house. Cream-colored brick, a blue front door, a backyard with a big oak tree that I used to sit under on summer mornings with my coffee. We adopted a golden retriever named Biscuit. We talked about children. We talked about growing old together. I worked my way up at my marketing firm. I became a senior account manager. I was good at my job. I was proud of it. But I was always careful to be home for dinner. Always careful to plan the weekends. Always careful to be the kind of wife I had promised to be. Daniel worked hard too. Long hours. A lot of travel. Client dinners. Conferences. There were weeks where I barely saw him, just a quick kiss in the morning, a tired collapse into bed at night. But that's life, right? That's what building something looks like. That's what my mother meant about the hard days. So I never complained. I kept the house. I fed Biscuit. I called his mother on her birthday. I organized Christmas. I showed up. Every single day, I showed up. And I thought he did too. That's the thing about being betrayed by someone you fully trust. You don't see it because you're not looking. You're not looking because you never imagined you'd have to. Looking back now, there were signs. Of course there were signs. There always are. About 8 months before that night, Daniel started coming home later. Not just a little later, significantly later. 11 o'clock. Midnight. Sometimes 1 in the morning. He said it was work. A big new client. A merger deal that needed constant attention. He showed me emails. He showed me calendar invites. It all looked real. It all looked legitimate. I believed him. And then there were the phone calls. The ones he took in the other room. The ones where he'd lower his voice and walk to the far end of the house. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But when I asked, he'd smile, that easy, practiced smile, and say it was a client. Confidential. He couldn't discuss it. I believed that too. There were weekends he said he had to fly out for work. Dallas. New York. London once. He'd pack a bag, kiss me goodbye, and be gone. Sometimes 2 days. Sometimes 4. I'd sit in our house with Biscuit and tell myself that this was temporary. That this was just a difficult season. That it would pass. I cooked dinners he wasn't there to eat. I went to weddings alone and told people he was traveling for work. I made excuses for him so many times that eventually I couldn't tell if I was protecting him or protecting myself from the truth I wasn't ready to see. But even then, even with all of that, I never once thought he would do what he did. I never once thought it would end like this. So here we are. That Tuesday in November. I had been asleep for about 3 hours. I remember it was exactly 4:07 in the morning because I looked at the clock on my nightstand when I heard the front door open. The sound of keys. Footsteps on the hardwood floor. Biscuit's nails clicking as he padded across the room to greet whoever had just come in. I sat up in bed. My heart was already doing something strange. Some instinct, some deep, primal thing inside me, already knew that something was wrong before my brain caught up. Daniel walked into the bedroom. He still had his coat on. His tie was loose. He looked different. Not tired different. Not drunk different. Something else. Something I had never seen on his face before. He turned on the lamp. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the room, looked at me, his wife of 11 years, sitting up in bed at 4 in the morning, squinting in the sudden light, and he said the words. Calm. Flat. Like he was reading a weather report. Sarah. I want a divorce. The room went completely still. I stared at him. And in that moment, in the 3 seconds of absolute silence that followed those 5 words, something inside me cracked wide open. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But deep. Like the first fracture in a foundation that had been slowly weakening for a long, long time. I opened my mouth. But nothing came out. Because the truth is, in that moment, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I had absolutely no idea what I was about to do next. Have you ever been so shocked by something that your body just stops? Not faints. Not collapses. Just stops. That's what happened to me. I sat in that bed, in that dim lamplight, staring at the man I had loved for 13 years, because yes, I'm counting the 2 years before we got married too, and I could not move. Could not speak. Could not process. Daniel, to his credit, or maybe to his discredit, did not look away. He stood there. Coat still on. Tie still loose. And he waited. Finally, I found my voice. What did you just say? He took a breath. I said I want a divorce, Sarah. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I should have said something sooner. I know that. But I'm saying it now. A long time. He'd been thinking about this for a long time. I almost laughed. I actually felt the laugh try to come out before the tears grabbed it back. At 4 in the morning, I said. My voice sounded strange to me. Small. Tight. Like someone had their hands around my throat. You chose 4 in the morning to tell me this. I'd been driving around, he said. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't keep doing this. Doing what? I asked. What are you doing, Daniel? What is it exactly that you can't keep doing? He looked at the floor. And that was when I felt it. That specific, terrible cold that creeps over you when you realize the conversation you're in is not the full conversation. That there is another story happening underneath the one you're being told. Is there someone else? I asked. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. 4 seconds of a man who had been my husband for 11 years deciding whether or not to tell me the truth. Yes, he said. One word. One word and the entire floor dropped out from under me. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like forever. It was probably 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, 11 years played through my mind in flashes. The coffee shop, the beach in Portugal, the little white church, the blue front door, the big oak tree, Biscuit as a puppy falling asleep on Daniel's chest. All of it. Gone. Replaced by one word. Yes. Who? I asked. He hesitated again. Who is she, Daniel? And then he told me. Her name was Nicole. Nicole. I knew the name. Of course I knew the name. Nicole was the new junior partner at his firm. I had met her exactly twice. Once at a company holiday party 2 years ago, and once at a dinner Daniel had arranged for the team at a restaurant downtown. She was in her early 30s. Tall. Polished. The kind of woman who seemed to have everything perfectly under control at all times. I had shaken her hand. I had smiled at her. I had made small talk about the appetizers. I had no idea she was already 6 months into destroying my marriage. How long? I asked. Daniel ran his hand through his hair. That gesture. That specific gesture, I had always found endearing. Now it made me feel sick. About 1.5 years, he said. 1.5 years. Nicole had been in my marriage for 1.5 years. She had been on those work trips. She had been in those phone calls from the other room. She had been the reason for the late nights, the distance, the growing coldness that I had kept telling myself was just stress, just work, just a hard season that would pass. She hadn't been passing. She had been moving in. Are you in love with her? I asked. Another pause. Yes, he said again. I got out of bed. I don't know why that was my response. I don't know what my body was doing or where it thought it was going. I just knew I could not sit still for one more second. I walked to the window. I looked out at our backyard. The big oak tree was standing there in the dark, just like always. Patient. Unmoved. Like it had no idea that everything around it had just been destroyed. Biscuit padded over and pressed his warm body against my leg. I put my hand on his head. And I made a decision. Not consciously. Not with a plan. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't thinking about revenge or justice or any of the things that came later. In that moment, I just made one very simple, very quiet decision. I was not going to fall apart in front of this man. I turned around. Okay, I said. Daniel blinked. Okay? Okay, I repeated. You want a divorce? Fine. But not tonight. Tonight you're going to go sleep in the guest room. And tomorrow we are going to have a real conversation. A calm, adult conversation. With lawyers if necessary. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Honestly? In that moment, I didn't fully recognize myself either. Sarah. Good night, Daniel. He opened his mouth. Closed it. And then he walked out of the room. I stood there for a long time after he left. Just me and Biscuit and the dark backyard and the oak tree that didn't know anything had changed. And then I did something I hadn't done since my mother's funeral 4 years earlier. I sat down on the floor. And I cried. Not the pretty kind of crying. Not the soft, cinematic kind. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep inside you that it scares you a little. The kind that sounds like something breaking. Because it is. Because something was breaking. I cried for a long time. And when I was done, when there was nothing left, I wiped my face. I looked at Biscuit. He tilted his head at me, the way golden retrievers do, like they're trying to understand. We're going to be okay, I told him. I didn't believe it yet. But I said it anyway. Because sometimes you have to say the thing before you can feel it. And then, somewhere in the back of my mind, quiet, small, but unmistakably clear, a thought appeared. Before I signed a single piece of paper. Before I agreed to a single thing. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I needed the full truth. And I had a very strong feeling that what Daniel had told me tonight was only the beginning of it. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. I lay in that bed, our bed, the bed we had shared for a decade, and stared at the ceiling while my mind ran through everything. Every memory. Every moment I had dismissed. Every time I had told myself I was overthinking. Every late night, every hushed phone call, every business trip I had packed his bag for and sent him off on with a kiss and an "I love you, be safe." 1.5 years. It had been going on for 1.5 years. Which meant while I was planning our 10th anniversary dinner, he was with her. While I was worrying about whether we should repaint the living room or try for a baby or take that trip to Italy we'd been talking about for years. He was already halfway out the door, living an entirely different life. And I had been completely, totally, humiliatingly blind to it. That was the part that kept hitting me. Not just the betrayal, though that was enormous. But the blindness. The foolishness of it. The way I had taken every single explanation he gave me at face value because I trusted him. Because I thought trusting the person you married was the right thing to do. My mother's voice in my head. A good marriage is built on trust, Sarah. Well. Look where trust got me. By 6 a.m, the hurt had started doing something else. Started transforming into something harder. Cooler. Something that felt less like heartbreak and more like clarity. I got up. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. And I started looking. Now, I want to be clear here. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I had never gone through Daniel's phone. Never checked his email. Never hired anyone to follow him. Not because I was naive, but because I genuinely believed that if you had to spy on your spouse, something was already broken beyond fixing. Well. Something was broken beyond fixing. So I started looking. Our finances first. We had always had a joint account for household expenses and separate personal accounts for our own spending. That had been Daniel's idea, actually, when we got married. Keeps things clean, he'd said. Keeps us from arguing about money. I had agreed. It seemed reasonable. Now, sitting there at 6 a.m. with my coffee getting cold beside me, I started to understand just how clean he'd kept things. I pulled up our joint account. Nothing unusual there, mortgage payments, utilities, groceries. Normal. But then I went back further. Started looking at patterns. And I noticed something. Every month, without fail, there was a cash withdrawal. A significant one. Not enormous. Not the kind that would wave a red flag immediately, but consistent. Between $1,500 and $2,000 every single month, for the past. I counted the months, my finger tracing backwards across the screen. 22 months. 22 months of regular, predictable cash withdrawals. Always on a Friday. Always from an ATM near his office downtown. That was over $30,000. Cash. Untraceable. Unaccountable. Gone. My hand was very still on the mouse. $30,000. I thought about where that money might have gone. Hotels. Restaurants. Gifts. A life maintained for a year and a half, not just an affair, but a parallel existence, funded quietly and carefully, right under my nose, with money from our shared account. I kept going. I checked his personal account. I knew the password because we'd set it up together years ago and I'd never had reason to change it or forget it. He had clearly forgotten that I knew it, because he hadn't changed it either. What I found there made the $30,000 look small. There was a recurring payment. Every month. To a property management company. I stared at it for a long time. Then I searched the company name. It was a rental management firm. Upscale apartments. Downtown Chicago. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. I want you to understand what I was piecing together in that moment. Daniel had not just been having an affair. Daniel had been renting an apartment. A second home. A place to go, a life to live, a version of himself that had nothing to do with me, our house, our dog, our oak tree, or our blue front door. He hadn't been living a double life occasionally. He had been living it consistently. Deliberately. Financially. I don't know how long I sat there. My coffee was ice cold. The sun had come up without me noticing. Biscuit was sitting at my feet, looking up at me, reading something in my stillness that worried him. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. "It's okay, buddy," I said softly. But I was already somewhere else in my mind. Already moving. Already calculating. Because here's the thing about what I found that morning. In the state of Illinois, where we lived, marital assets are divided based on what's called equitable distribution. Which means that what is spent during the marriage belongs, in theory, to both partners. Financial misconduct, including hiding assets, making undisclosed expenditures, funding a secret life, is taken very seriously in divorce proceedings. I knew this because my college roommate, Jenny, was a family law attorney. We had stayed close over the years. She had handled her own painful divorce 3 years earlier, and I had sat with her through it, held her hand, helped her pack boxes. Now I picked up my phone and called her. It was 7:15 in the morning. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah? Everything okay?" "No," I said. "Jenny, I need your help." There was a pause. And then, quietly, because Jenny is one of those people who can read an entire situation in a single word, she said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the 4 a.m. conversation. About Nicole. About the year and a half. About the cash withdrawals, about the apartment, about everything I had found in the past hour while the rest of the world was still asleep. Jenny listened without interrupting. Which, if you know Jenny, tells you how serious she understood this to be. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Do not let him move any money, close any accounts, or change any passwords. Not today, not tomorrow, not until I've seen everything." "Okay," I said. "And Sarah?" Her voice was firm but warm. "I need you to hear this. What you found this morning. That changes everything." I understood. I hung up the phone. And I sat there in my kitchen, in the quiet morning, with my cold coffee and my worried dog and the weight of everything I now knew pressing down on me like something enormous. But underneath the weight, something else was there. Something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, though the anger was there, deep and steady and real. Not sadness, though the sadness was a living thing inside my chest. No, the thing I felt, quietly and surprisingly, was something closer to power. Because here's what Daniel did not know. He had walked into that bedroom at 4 in the morning thinking he held all the cards. Thinking he could say 5 words, hand me papers, and walk out of our life cleanly. Thinking I would cry, and grieve, and eventually sign whatever was put in front of me because I was patient, and gracious, and trusting. He had spent 11 years watching me be those things. And so he had made the mistake of thinking that was all I was. He had never seen what I was capable of when I stopped being patient. He was about to find out. Jenny came over that afternoon. Daniel had left the house by 10 in the morning. He said he was going to the office, but we both knew where he was actually going. He had packed a bag from the guest room. He had taken Biscuit's second leash off the hook by the door, and then realized it was Biscuit's, and put it back. That small moment, that tiny, accidental act of habit, hit me harder than almost anything else. Because it showed me that even now, even after everything, there were still traces of the person I thought he was. Little ghost impressions of the man I had married, still rattling around inside the shell of the one who had just blown up our life. I watched him drive away from the front window. Then I turned around and started making a list. By the time Jenny arrived at 1 o'clock with a bag of groceries, because that's the kind of friend she is, she doesn't show up empty-handed when the world is falling apart, I had 3 pages of notes. She sat down at the kitchen table, looked at my 3 pages, and smiled. "There she is," Jenny said. "What?" "The version of you that doesn't take things lying down." She opened her bag and started pulling out food. I was wondering when she was going to show up. I almost smiled. It felt strange on my face. Like a muscle I'd forgotten I had. Jenny was in full lawyer mode within minutes. And as she walked me through what the next steps looked like legally, I began to understand the full picture of where I actually stood. And it was not the picture Daniel thought I was standing in. Here's what Jenny explained. In Illinois, marital waste, meaning money that one spouse spends outside the marriage without the other spouse's knowledge or consent, is taken into account during divorce proceedings. The court can order that spouse to reimburse the marital estate for what was wasted. Which meant that the $30,000 in cash withdrawals, and the months of rent payments on a secret apartment, were not simply gone. They were documented. Provable. And very, very relevant. Furthermore, Jenny said, any assets accumulated during the marriage, including the appreciation on our house, any investments, retirement accounts, bonuses, were considered marital property to be split equitably. Which meant I was entitled to far more than Daniel was probably counting on giving me. He walked in thinking he could hand you a simple settlement, Jenny said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel with the calm efficiency of someone completely in their element. But what you found this morning? That's called financial misconduct, Sarah. And it changes the entire calculation. I nodded slowly. But here's what I need from you, she said. Before we file anything. Before we send a single letter. I need documentation. Everything you found, backed up. Screenshots, account statements, anything you can legally access. I have it, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Already? I've been awake since 4 in the morning, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded, slowly. Good girl. Over the next 2 weeks, while Daniel stayed at what I now knew was the apartment paid for with our money, I built a case. I am a marketing professional. My job, for 17 years, has been to understand information, organize it, and present it in the most compelling way possible. I am good at research. I am good at finding patterns. I am good at building narratives from data. I turned all of those skills toward my own life. I pulled every bank statement for the past 2 years. I cataloged every unexplained withdrawal, every duplicate expense, every transfer that didn't match what I'd been told. Jenny had connected me with a forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous woman named Dr. Reeves who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and spoke about numbers the way other people speak about poetry. And together, we started building a document that told a very different story than the one Daniel planned to tell a judge. The story we were building said this: Daniel had spent, over the course of 22 months, approximately $68,000 of marital funds on his secret life. Between the cash withdrawals, the apartment rent, the credit card charges on a card I hadn't known existed, $68,000. Gone. Hidden. Spent on another woman while I sat in our house, walked our dog, paid our mortgage, and trusted him. $68,000. When Dr. Reeves showed me the final number, I sat very still for a moment. Then I said, "Can we prove all of it?" She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Every cent," she said. I thought about Daniel standing in our bedroom at 4 in the morning. Coat still on. Tie still loose. Saying those 5 words like he was placing a parking ticket on the kitchen counter. I thought about the ease of it. The casualness. The confidence of a man who assumed the person he was talking to had no power. And I thought about something my mother used to say, a thing she said so often I stopped really hearing it for years, the way you stop hearing a clock tick when it's been in the room long enough. She used to say, "The truth always has a way of catching up, Sarah. You just have to be patient enough to let it." I had been patient for a long time. I was almost done being patient. But here's the thing, and this is important, because it shaped everything I did next. I did not want to destroy Daniel. I know that sounds strange. Maybe even unbelievable, given what he'd done. But it's true. I didn't want to blow up his life the way he'd blown up mine. I didn't want revenge in the ugly, scorched earth sense. I didn't want to call his mother, or go to his office, or post anything on the internet. What I wanted was something much simpler. I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted to be seen. I wanted the people who mattered, in the legal system, in our financial lives, in the world that was about to be divided and restructured and rebuilt, to see exactly what had happened. Exactly who had done what. Exactly what this man had taken from me, not just emotionally, but concretely, financially, provably. And then I wanted to walk away from it with everything I was rightfully owed. That was my plan. Not revenge. Justice. And the difference between those two things, I had come to understand, is everything. 3 weeks after the 4 a.m. conversation, Jenny filed the initial divorce petition. I remember the exact moment she sent me the confirmation. I was sitting at my desk at work. I had gone back to work after a week, because sitting in that house alone was doing nothing for my mental state, and work had always been the place where I felt most like myself. I was reviewing a campaign proposal when my phone buzzed. Jenny's name on the screen. "It's filed. He'll be served by end of day." I set the phone down. Took a breath. Picked it back up. "Okay," I typed. "Let's go." Daniel was served the divorce papers that afternoon at his office. I know this because his assistant, a young woman named Priya who had always been kind to me at office events, texted me about 20 minutes after it happened. She didn't say much. Just, "Are you okay?" I heard. "I'm sorry, Sarah." Which told me everything about what the atmosphere at that office was like when a man in a glass walled office receives divorce papers from the wife he thought he'd left quietly. Not quietly, it turned out. Not quietly at all. What happened next moved faster than I expected. Daniel called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, and I want to tell you about this message because it revealed something very important about what kind of man I was really dealing with. He didn't sound upset. He didn't sound remorseful. He didn't say, "Sarah, I'm sorry, can we talk?" He didn't even sound particularly surprised. He sounded annoyed. His message said, and I am paraphrasing, but barely, that he thought we had agreed to handle this like adults, that there was no need to involve attorneys at this stage, that he had a perfectly fair settlement already prepared, and that this was only going to make things more complicated and expensive for both of us. A perfectly fair settlement. Already prepared. Before I had even been awake for 24 hours after he dropped his bomb, he had a settlement ready. Which meant he had been planning this, the timing, the terms, the entire exit strategy, for a long time. Long before that Tuesday night in November. He had calculated exactly what he intended to give me, and exactly what he intended to keep, and he had walked into that bedroom at 4 a.m. expecting me to be too shocked, too hurt, too passive to push back. I listened to the voicemail 3 times. And then I saved it. Because in that message, entirely by accident, Daniel had told me everything I needed to know about his approach to this process. He thought I was still the woman who believed him. He hadn't updated his model of me. That was his biggest mistake. Jenny sent his attorney our full financial documentation the following week. The account statements. The cash withdrawal records. The apartment lease. Which, through entirely legal and above board means that I won't bore you with the details of, we had managed to obtain a copy of. The credit card records from the card I hadn't known about. The $68,000 figure, laid out clearly, documented meticulously, every cent accounted for. Dr. Reeves had done an extraordinary job. The document was airtight. I know this because of what happened next. The response from Daniel's attorney arrived 48 hours later. Jenny called me the moment she read it. "Sarah," she said, and I could hear something in her voice, something between professional satisfaction and genuine delight. "They want to talk." "Talk," I repeated. "Not go to court?" "They are very motivated," Jenny said carefully, "to avoid going to court." Of course they were. Because going to court meant all of this became public record. It meant a judge looking at $68,000 of documented marital waste and making decisions accordingly. It meant Daniel's professional reputation, that carefully constructed image of the trustworthy, successful financial consultant, being associated, permanently and publicly, with the words financial misconduct. He didn't want that. Nicole definitely didn't want that. Their attorneys absolutely didn't want that. So suddenly, the man who had been perfectly fair settlement already prepared was very interested in having a conversation. We scheduled a mediation session. In the 2 days before that session, I did something that had nothing to do with lawyers or finances. I called my sister. My sister, Claire, is 3 years older than me. She lives in Portland. We talk every week, but I hadn't told her about any of this yet, not because I was hiding it, but because I hadn't been ready. The whole thing still felt like something that was happening to someone else. Like a story I was living inside of but hadn't yet fully accepted as real. When I told her, she was silent for so long that I had to say her name twice to make sure she was still there. "Claire?" "I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm just..." "Sarah, I'm so sorry." "I know. Are you okay? Are you actually okay?" And here's the thing. Here's the thing that surprised me. I took a breath. I thought about it, really thought about it, honestly, without performing any particular emotion, and I said, "I think I might actually be okay." Claire exhaled. "Yeah? I found something," I told her. When I started looking at everything. When I started understanding the full picture. I paused, trying to find the right words. I found out who I actually am when things fall apart. And she's not what I expected. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom always said you were the strongest one." I closed my eyes. "She said you just didn't know it yet," Claire added softly. "She said one day something would come along and you'd find out." I sat with that for a long time. My mother. Who had told me to trust. To be patient. To be gracious. But who had also, I understood now, raised a woman capable of sitting at a kitchen table at 6 a.m, alone, with cold coffee and a loyal dog, and choosing, deliberately and clearly, not to fall apart. She had built both things into me. The grace and the steel. And now, finally, it was time to use them both. The mediation session was held on a gray Thursday morning in early January. A neutral conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the lake. A long table. Leather chairs. The kind of room that is designed to feel professional and calm, as if the setting itself can contain whatever human wreckage is brought into it. I arrived 15 minutes early. Jenny was already there, setting up. She looked up when I walked in, assessed me in one quick glance, the way good lawyers assess people, reading nerves, readiness, resolve, and nodded once. "You look good," she said. "I feel like I might be sick," I told her honestly. "That's normal," she said. "It'll pass when it starts." "It always does." She was right. Daniel arrived 8 minutes later with his attorney, a man named Garrett, slick and smooth, the kind of attorney who clearly specialized in making problematic situations disappear as quietly and cost-effectively as possible. Daniel was wearing a suit I recognized. Navy blue. I had picked it out with him 3 years ago at a department store on Michigan Avenue. We had laughed about something in that store. I couldn't remember what. He didn't look at me when he walked in. Not immediately. He sat down, arranged his papers, spoke quietly to Garrett. And then, finally, he looked up. And for just a moment, just the briefest flicker, something moved across his face. Something that might have been surprise, or guilt, or the particular discomfort of a man who expected to walk into a room with a broken woman and found someone else sitting there instead. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. Didn't look away. Just met his eyes steadily and let him look at whatever it was he saw. After a second, he looked back down at his papers. Garrett opened by presenting Daniel's settlement proposal. It was, as advertised, perfectly fair. It offered me the house, which was generous on the surface, along with a modest sum for spousal support, a split of the joint accounts, and what he described as an equitable division of assets. What it did not include was any acknowledgement of the $68,000. Not a mention of it. Not an accounting of it. Nothing. It was as if it had simply never happened. Jenny let Garrett finish his presentation. She is extraordinarily good at letting people finish before she speaks. It's a skill I have always admired in her, that ability to hold completely still, to give no indication of what's coming, to let the other side believe for just a little longer that they are winning. Then she opened her folder. And she put our documentation on the table. She didn't make a speech. She didn't make it theatrical. She simply slid the organized, bound document, 64 pages of financial records, statements, analysis, and Dr. Reeves' certified forensic accounting summary, across the table toward Garrett. And she said, very calmly, "I think we need to discuss a different starting point." The room changed. I watched it happen. I watched Garrett's eyes move across the first page of that document. I watched the way his expression shifted, just barely, just professionally, from confidence to careful attention. I watched him flip to the second page. The third. Daniel was watching Garrett's face. And from watching Garrett's face, he was understanding what was in those pages. He knew what was in those pages. Of course he did. He was the one who had spent the money. But knowing a thing and seeing it laid out in 64 pages of documented, certified evidence by a forensic accountant are two entirely different experiences. His jaw tightened. Garrett asked for a 5-minute break. In the hallway, in the narrow, carpeted hallway outside the conference room, I could hear the muffled sound of conversation. Not words. Just the rhythm of it. Urgent. Short. The kind of conversation where someone is being told something they don't want to hear. Jenny sat beside me in the conference room and refilled her water glass. "Doing okay?" she murmured. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. When they came back, Garrett's energy had shifted. The smooth, confident presentation energy was gone, replaced with something more guarded. More careful. The energy of a man recalibrating. What followed was 3.5 hours of negotiation. I am not going to walk you through every exchange, because some of it was tedious and procedural in the way that legal things are. But I am going to tell you about the moment that mattered most. About 2 hours in, there was a lull. A moment where both attorneys were reviewing a document and the room went briefly quiet. And in that quiet, Daniel looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time that day. Maybe for the first time in a long time. And he said, quietly, not through his attorney, not for the record, just quietly, across the table, like the two people we had once been to each other, I didn't think you'd do this. I looked back at him. I know, I said. I didn't think, he started. I know what you thought, Daniel, I said softly. You thought I'd be too hurt to look clearly. Too sad to be strategic. You thought you knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was capable of. I paused. You were wrong. He was quiet for a moment. I am sorry, he said. And I actually believe, that in that moment, he meant it. I know you are, I said. But I'm not here for apologies today. I'm here for what's fair. He nodded. Slowly. Once. And that, in a way, was the real turning point. Not a dramatic explosion. Not a public exposure. Not a scene. Just a moment of two people finally seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. By the end of that session, we had a new framework. One that acknowledged the financial misconduct. One that significantly restructured the asset division. One that looked nothing like the perfectly fair proposal Garrett had arrived with that morning. Jenny walked me to the elevator afterward. When the doors closed and it was just the two of us, she turned to me and said, "That was one of the most composed performances I have ever seen in a mediation room." "It wasn't a performance," I said. She smiled. "I know. That's what made it so effective." After the mediation, things moved relatively quickly from a legal standpoint. But outside the legal process, other things were moving too. Things I had not orchestrated, had not planned, and honestly had not anticipated. It started about 3 weeks after that conference room morning. I got a message on my phone from an unknown number. A woman. She said she was a colleague of Nicole's from the firm. She said she had heard things, about the divorce, about what had come out, and she wanted me to know something. I almost didn't respond. But something told me to. What she told me changed the shape of the story again. Nicole, it turned out, was not simply a woman who had fallen in love with a married man. She had known, from very early on, the woman told me, exactly what she was doing and exactly what she wanted from it. She had spoken openly in their office about it. Had even, apparently, told a colleague that she thought Daniel would leave his wife within the year and that she intended to eventually be Mrs. Nicole. More than that, and this was the part that genuinely shocked me. Nicole had also been communicating with Daniel during our negotiation process. Not about anything technically illegal. But coaching him, encouraging him, reassuring him. From what this woman described, Nicole had told Daniel he was being too generous and that I didn't deserve what I was asking for. She had opinions, apparently, about what the woman whose life she helped destroy deserved. I sat with that for a long time. And then I filed it away. Not for use. Just for understanding. For the full picture of what I was actually dealing with. Because here's what I have come to understand about betrayal, real, deep betrayal, the kind that comes from inside a life you built with someone. It is rarely just one person's failing. It is almost always a system. A set of choices made over time, supported by circumstances, enabled by silence. By the assumption that one person in the equation won't look too closely. Won't push back. Won't be capable of more than grief. Daniel made choices. Nicole made choices. Both of them built something together on the foundation of my trust and my blindness. And both of them, in their own ways, to their own degrees, were now living with what those choices had built. Because consequences, it turns out, are not only legal. About a month after the mediation, I heard through mutual friends that there was significant tension at the firm between Daniel and Nicole. That the exposure of the affair, the fact that it had moved from private to formally documented in legal proceedings, had created a very uncomfortable atmosphere professionally. Financial consulting is a trust-based profession. Your clients trust you with their money, with their futures, with their most vulnerable decisions. The idea that one of their consultants had been secretly mismanaging his own household finances while maintaining a hidden life was not a good look. I did not spread this information. I didn't have to. The truth, once it starts moving, has its own momentum. Daniel's largest client, a man named Harrington who had been with the firm for 15 years and who I had met at a dozen company dinners, moved his portfolio to another firm. I don't know if this was directly connected. Maybe it was coincidence. But the timing was notable. These were not things I had planned. They were not part of my strategy. I had never reached out to anyone to share information, never tried to damage Daniel's reputation externally, never done anything other than pursue what was legally mine through proper channels. But the truth has a way of filling space. My mother's voice again, it always has a way of catching up. Yes, Mom. I know. I understand now. Meanwhile, my own life was slowly, carefully, quietly being rebuilt. I had kept the house. The cream-colored brick house with the blue front door and the oak tree in the backyard. Daniel had signed it over as part of the settlement. I think, in the end, he needed to believe that he was being generous. That the outcome reflected well on him in some way. That he had given me something. He had. He'd given me more than he planned to. But the house itself, that was mine. That was ours, mine and Biscuit's, mine and the oak trees, mine and the memory of who I had been and the quiet beginning of who I was becoming. The first night I slept there alone, really alone, with no guest room ghost on the other side of the wall. I sat in the backyard after dinner. It was late February. Still cold. I had a blanket around my shoulders and a mug of tea in my hands. Biscuit was beside me, pressed against my leg. The sky was very clear. Stars everywhere. I thought about my mother. About what she would say if she could see me right then, sitting in this backyard in the cold, single at 41, dog beside me, house behind me, a year of betrayal and discovery and excavation slowly settling into something I could almost see the shape of. I think she would say, "There she is." I think she would smile. And I think she would say, "I always knew." Let me tell you what the months after a life-altering betrayal actually look like. Not the movie version. Not the montage of a woman cutting her hair and buying new shoes and dancing in her kitchen. The real version. The real version is quieter. And stranger. And in many ways, more interesting. It's the Tuesday morning when you wake up and realize you don't have to explain where you're going. The Saturday afternoon when you repaint the bedroom, just you, a roller brush, and 3 hours of podcasts. And choose a color that you love that he would have hated, and feel something light and private and yours as you cover the walls with it. It's the first time you laugh, really laugh, at nothing, at something stupid a friend says on the phone, and realize it's the first time in longer than you can remember that the laugh came easily. Without effort. Without being performed for someone else's comfort. It's the grief that still comes. Because it does. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives without warning, in the grocery store, in the middle of a work call, at 2 a.m. when the house is dark and quiet and you reach across an empty bed for no particular reason and remember. You let it come. You let it pass. You stop fighting the hard moments and start just moving through them. I started therapy in February. This is not a dramatic revelation, it's just what I did, and I think it mattered. I found a woman named Dr. Patel who wore bright colors and kept a plant on her desk that she talked to occasionally during sessions, which I found both odd and enormously comforting. She helped me understand something that took me a long time to accept. The failure of my marriage was not evidence of my inadequacy. I had spent so many months asking myself what I missed, what I should have done differently, whether if I had been more attentive or more exciting or more something, the outcome would have been different. Dr. Patel helped me understand that this is what betrayal does. It makes the person who was betrayed audit themselves. Because auditing yourself is easier, in a way, than accepting that someone else's choices were simply that, their choices. Nothing to do with your worth or your value or whether you were enough. I had been enough. I had been more than enough. The problem was never me. That sounds simple. It took 8 months of therapy to really believe it. I went back to full capacity at work by the spring. I had been operating at maybe 70% through the winter, doing my job, meeting my deadlines, keeping things together professionally, but not really thriving. By spring, something had shifted. I pitched a campaign concept that had been sitting in my head for months, something bold and unusual that I'd been sitting on because I wasn't sure the timing was right. My boss loved it. We won the account. It was the biggest account our firm had landed in 2 years. My boss took me to lunch to celebrate. "You seem different," she said, over salads and sparkling water. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Sharper," she said finally. "Like something got removed that was taking up space you needed." I thought about that for a long time. Maybe that was exactly what had happened. Grief takes up space. Fear takes up space. The constant low-level anxiety of a marriage that is quietly falling apart, which you feel but can't name, that takes up the most space of all. I had been carrying so much weight for so long without knowing it. Now I wasn't carrying it anymore. My sister Claire visited in April. She stayed for a week, the longest stretch we'd spent together in years. We stayed up too late every night, talking and laughing and sometimes crying, the way you do with someone who has known you since you were children and has no particular investment in whether you're fine or not, who just wants to know how you actually are. One night she said to me, "Do you ever think about dating again?" I laughed. "It has been 4 months, Claire." "I know. I'm just asking." I thought about it honestly. "Not yet," I said. "But, maybe eventually." "Yeah." "What would you want this time?" she asked. And I found that I had an answer. A real one. "Honesty," I said. "Just honesty. Everything else I can figure out. But honesty as the starting point. Non-negotiable." Claire nodded. "And someone," I added, "who isn't afraid of me." She raised an eyebrow. "Daniel was afraid of me," I said slowly, working it out as I spoke. "I think that's why he hid things. Not because I was frightening. But because somewhere, deep down, he knew that if I ever saw clearly, I would be more than he could manage. And instead of being in a partnership with a capable woman, he managed me. Kept me partial. Kept me in the version of me he could control." I paused. "Next time, I want someone who wants the whole version." Claire looked at me for a long moment. "God," she said. "Dr. Patel is good." I laughed. Outside, the oak tree moved in the spring wind. Biscuit was asleep at my feet. The blue front door was locked, but I knew exactly where the key was. And I felt, for the first time in a very long time, that I knew where I was going. People have a very specific idea of what justice looks like in a story like this. They want a scene. A confrontation. A moment where the person who did wrong is publicly shamed, visibly destroyed, reduced to nothing. They want the revenge to be visible. Loud. Satisfying in the way a car crash is satisfying in an action movie. Spectacular, definitive, impossible to miss. Real justice, I have learned, looks nothing like that. Real justice is quieter. More durable. More complex. By the time the divorce was finalized, on a Friday in July, almost exactly 8 months after that 4 a.m. conversation, here is what justice looked like for me. I kept the house. I kept Biscuit. I walked away with my fair share of the assets we had built together. Adjusted for the financial misconduct, documented and certified and acknowledged in a legal settlement that Daniel's attorney had worked very hard to keep as quiet as possible. I kept my career. I kept my friends. I kept my name. I kept myself. That last one sounds simple. It isn't. Because here is what I came to understand about what Daniel had actually tried to do that night. Not consciously, maybe. But in effect. In practice. When you walk into a room at 4 in the morning, after months or years of slowly withdrawing your attention, your honesty, your presence, and you say 5 words that are designed to end things on your terms, what you are really doing is trying to define the other person's reality for them. You are trying to tell them, this is who you are. This is what you're worth. This is what I will give you, and you will accept it, because you don't have the power to do anything else. That is what Daniel tried to do. And what I did, not dramatically, not loudly, not even particularly angrily, was refuse to let him. I refused to be the person he had decided I was. And in that refusal, in that quiet, stubborn, deeply personal act of seeing myself clearly when someone else was trying to make me small, I found something I didn't expect to find. I found out that I had always been more than what I was given credit for. Not just by Daniel. By myself. I had been so committed to being patient, to being gracious, to being the stable, reliable, uncomplicated presence in our life, that I had not made enough space for the other things I was. The sharp things. The strategic things. The things that sat in my chest at 6 in the morning and catalogued bank statements with cold coffee and a loyal dog and refused to be fooled twice. Those things had always been there. I had just never needed them quite so urgently before. As for Daniel, I won't pretend I know exactly how his story continues. We have not spoken since the finalization. There was one email, practical, about forwarding some mail. That was all. From what I have heard, through the network of shared acquaintances that you can never fully escape in a city you've lived in for 17 years, things with Nicole did not proceed the way either of them expected. The circumstances under which the relationship became public had cast a shadow over it that apparently proved difficult to move out from under. The romantic story of two people choosing each other lost a certain amount of its shine when it became, publicly and legally, the story of financial misconduct and documented deception. Whether they stayed together, separated, or are somewhere in between, I genuinely do not know. And I found, sometime around May, during a long walk with Biscuit along the lakefront on a warm evening, that I genuinely did not care. Not in a bitter, suppressed way. Not in the way where you say you don't care and you actually care enormously. In a real way. In the way that happens when you have processed something fully enough that it has stopped having power over you. When it has become part of your story without being the center of it. Daniel's life was Daniel's life to live. Mine was mine. And I had work to do. It is October now. The oak tree in my backyard is doing something extraordinary. All year, I watched it from the kitchen window. In the winter, bare and stark against the gray sky, just structure and skeleton. In the spring, the first tentative unfurling of leaves, cautious, uncertain, as if the tree needed to check first that it was safe. In the summer, full and green and generous with shade. And now, in October, it has turned the most extraordinary color. Not just orange. Not just yellow. Both, all at once, shifting from one to the other in the afternoon light, so that depending on which angle you look from, it seems like a completely different tree. I have been looking at it a lot lately. Thinking about what it taught me. Here's what I think. Trees do not apologize for losing their leaves. They do not grieve the fact that they shed things that were once beautiful and necessary. They do not stand in the yard and mourn the summer or refuse to enter the winter. They do the only thing they can do, they let go of what they cannot hold, they hold what remains, and they trust, based on nothing but the deep knowledge of what they are, that spring will come again. I lost things this year that I cannot fully count. I lost a marriage. I lost 11 years of a version of the future I had planned. I lost the person I thought I knew. I lost a certain kind of innocence about the people closest to you, that comfortable, warm belief that the ones who love you are incapable of choosing not to. Those are real losses. I am not pretending they aren't. But here is what I found. I found out that I am capable of being broken and still functional. That these two things can coexist. That you can have a fracture running through you and still stand up straight. Still walk into rooms. Still do your work. Still laugh with your sister until 2 in the morning. Still sit in a backyard under an oak tree with a golden retriever and a mug of tea and feel, against all odds, something that is not happiness exactly, not yet, but is the quiet, sturdy forerunner of it. I found out that justice does not require a scene. That the most powerful thing you can do when someone underestimates you is simply to become, clearly and undeniably, more than they thought. I found out that the best revenge, if we're going to use that word, though I prefer to call it something else, is not making someone else's life harder. It is making your own life better. Unmistakably, visibly, undeniably better. And I found out something about trust. My mother was right that trust is the foundation of a good marriage. But I had misunderstood something fundamental about her lesson. I had thought trust meant believing everything. Accepting everything. Asking nothing. But real trust, healthy trust, is not blind. Real trust is earned. Continuously. By actions that match words. By a person who shows up not just in the good moments but in the honest ones. By a partner who, when things are hard, chooses to face you instead of away from you. I was patient for 11 years with a man who was not doing those things. I gave him my trust freely, completely, without asking if it was being honored. I won't make that mistake again. Not because I am closed now. Not because I have become hard. But because I understand, finally, the difference between grace and naivety. Between loyalty and blindness. Between being the person who holds the marriage together and being the only person holding the marriage together. Next time, and I do believe there will be a next time, sometime, when the right person arrives and the foundation is real, I will be both things. Warm and watchful. Trusting and clear-eyed. Gracious and fierce. Both things. All the things. The whole version. The version Daniel never knew was there. Before I end, I want to say something to anyone who is listening to this and recognizing their own story in mine. If you are sitting somewhere right now, holding a secret fear that something is not right. If you have been explaining away the late nights and the phone calls and the distance and the small, accumulating wrongnesses that you can't quite name. If you have been so committed to being the steady one, the patient one, the one who holds it together, that you have stopped truly looking. Look. Not from fear. Not to find something. Just, be willing to see what is there. Because the truth, as my mother always said, has a way of catching up. And you deserve to be in possession of it. You deserve to know what you're actually dealing with. And if what you find breaks something in you, it may. It probably will. That is not the end of your story. It is, as awful as it sounds, the beginning of the part where you find out who you actually are. Who you have always been. Who was waiting, quietly, underneath all that patience. I stood in a bedroom at 4 in the morning and heard 5 words that I thought were the end of everything. They weren't the end. They were the door. And I walked through it. Biscuit is at my feet right now. The oak tree is turning gold outside the window. The house is quiet and mine and full of the particular peace that comes from living honestly in a space you have earned. I am 41 years old. I am just getting started. And if you're somewhere in the middle of your own breaking, I need you to hear this. So are you. If this story moved you, if you heard something in it that felt like your own truth, or someone you love, or a version of a life you've lived or feared, then I ask you one small thing. Share it. Because stories like this don't belong to just one person. They belong to everyone who has ever sat in the dark and wondered if they were strong enough for what was coming. They are. You are. Don't forget to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done differently? What part of this story stayed with you? We'll be back with another story soon. Until then, take care of yourself. And don't be afraid of what you find when you finally start looking.